Pittsburgh Steelers general manager Omar Khan has just come out and said that the Steelers aren't good enough at wide receiver and that he needs to add more playmakers. But first, before I get more into what he said and his quotes, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn notifications for everything Pittsburgh Steelers news and updates. Also like this video. Now, let's get right back into it. So, at his combine interview, Omar Khan, he basically has come out and said everything that we as fans are thinking about this Pittsburgh Steelers team. And basically, playmakers need to be added on the offense, not just the defense. And he plans on leaving no stone unturned in the pursuit of adding playmakers at the wide receiver position this offseason. In a direct quote from Omar Khan, this is what he said. "It's obviously a priority. I'm not going to run from that. It's just a reality. We have some guys that are free agents, and we weren't good enough at that position, so we'll look at everything." End quote. But later on, he continued by saying, overall, we weren't good enough. Just, you got to score more. The reality is you got to score a lot of points in the league in 2025 football. You got to score a lot of points, and we didn't score enough points. There's a lot of reasons for that, and we just got to be better. End quote. And then later on, his last quote on this topic, he said, "Based on how the season ended last year, the reality is we got to get more playmakers. We all recognize that. You can't have enough playmakers. You guys watched us last year. We obviously need more playmakers." End quote. So, when looking at this topic overall, I'm not going to sit here and say that Omar Khan wasn't trying to add playmakers and add wide receivers to this team last season. He just was not capable of landing any deal or landing anyone in free agency. But he apparently was trying per reports. But at the same time, you're not going to sit here and act like just because you're trying to add playmakers doesn't mean that's good enough. Because it's not, because no one was actually added. We've been waiting for a playmaker, a wide receiver to be added to this team for a long time, whether that's free agency, trying to sign some people, or whether that was a trade market and Brandon Ayuk and whoever else was available. We're waiting all offseason and the whole season for a deal to get done at wide receiver, but it just never came. The Steelers sent out a playmaker in wide receiver Deontay Johnson, and then they got back a cornerback instead, so they gave away a playmaker. So the Pittsburgh Steelers, they've been connected to all these names at wide receiver for a long time, but that's not good enough. At some point, we have to look at it and be like, hey, are we going to land one of them or are we not going to land one of them? It's because right now, we haven't landed any of them. So looking at who the Steelers have been connected to since the end of this season, the Steelers have been linked to Los Angeles Rams wide receiver Cooper Kupp. They've been linked to 49ers wide receiver Deebo Samuel. General Manager Omar Khan says he and his front office staff will be looking everywhere for upgrades, but this offseason, in terms of who's available, wasn't as much as who was available last offseason, because there's way more players available last offseason at wide receiver. We all know that T. Higgins, he's not going to get traded to the Steelers, so we don't have to worry about any of that, and there just aren't as many big names who are actually going to impact the team at a huge level. Cooper Kupp doesn't look like he's the same wide receiver as he once was. I know the Pittsburgh Steelers were heavily connected to him at the trade deadline, so maybe they look back and say, hey, can we trade for Cooper Kupp? But at this point of his career, is he going to be the same player? Maybe he could get back to it, but as of right now, he doesn't look like the same. Also, Deebo Samuel, he hasn't been the same player he was for the last few seasons now, and is he going to be the number 2 receiver? Who knows? The reason he wants out of 49ers is because he wants more opportunities and he wants to be the number 1 receiver and treated as the number 1 receiver, but he won't be in Pittsburgh. That's just not how they operate. So, looking at the Steelers team this past season that just ended, they went to the season trading away, like I said, Deontay Johnson, leaving George Pickens to be the number 1 receiver. And then they had as a number 2 receiver, basically the whole season, I would say the number 2 receiver was Van Jefferson. Not in terms of the opportunity he had in terms of targets and catches, but in terms of playing time. Van Jefferson was the number 2 receiver on this team. He was the player that went from number 5 receiver with Atlanta Falcons a year prior to being the number 2 receiver on the Pittsburgh Steelers. And that just doesn't make sense because he wasn't good enough player in his time in the entire NFL that he's been in the league, he hasn't been a good enough player to be the number 2 receiver. But that's what the Steelers went with. He was a number 2 receiver. In terms of opportunity on the field, in terms of playing time, Calvin Austin was a number 3 receiver. But he ended up being the number 2 receiver based off of catches, targets, and things of that nature. So, Calvin Austin, he is a 5'9" receiver, 5'8". He's been actually really good for what was expected this upcoming season. Everyone was saying he's a bust and things of that nature because he got injured this first season, but he's really coming to his own and coming to his own role and continuing to get better. Everyone has high praise for him in terms of Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson. So yes, he's a really good receiver in terms of what he's capable of, and he showed that this past season. And I've always been a big fan of him in this league and always want the best for him, and I really think he can help this team in terms of a slot receiver role. But him being a number 2 receiver this past season, when the year prior he didn't really show anything, that just doesn't make sense. You see how that works? The way that they put people in certain roles this past season, if you're really trying to win, how are these guys going to be in a bigger role when they didn't prove anything the year prior? So, Calvin Austin, Van Jefferson, those were your number 2, number 3 receivers, and comparing that to other teams in the league, that just doesn't make sense, and now you see why the Steelers need to add more playmakers. The way that they've been utilizing these playmakers or players on their team just don't make no sense. Scotty Miller was on this team getting some big-time plays this past season in terms of being on the field a lot for no reason. So when you have these players on the field, and you see around the league, and these other teams are having guys like, for example, the Cincinnati Bengals, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase. They have that rookie that was playing really well. They have another receiver that's been playing really well. They have a lot of playmakers on their team. I know they weren't in the playoffs because of their defense, but big playmakers. You look at who the Ravens have. They have some wide receivers on their team. They have really good standout receivers in Bateman. They have Zay Flowers. They have other receivers who are actually good enough to play their position. And the Steelers, on the other hand, they're not that. That's not what they do. They just rely on their defense. And that's why I've been talking about this whole time, is the Steelers are investing into their defense, but their defense is not proving any dividends for the amount of money they're putting into them. They always fall off of a cliff at the very end of the season and end up ruining the Steelers season. But at some point, if you don't invest in your defense and you invest more into your offense and these playmakers, then maybe stuff will change. But right now, the standard is the defense, but that just hasn't been going well for the team. So at least it's a good sign that Omar Khan is realizing this and realizing that you have to actually score points in 2025, and you can't just score 13 points a game and hope that you win games because your defense only allows less than 13. That's just not how it works anymore. But hopefully Omar Khan, he actually adds playmakers instead of being all talk, because right now it's all talk. So one last thing for me on this topic. When I say adding playmakers, when Omar Khan is saying adding playmakers, I'm not talking about just the trade block. You could add playmakers in different categories. For like the draft, the Pittsburgh Steelers are spending all these top draft picks, first round, second round draft picks, on adding to the defense. You could use these draft picks to add to the offense. You could select a receiver in the first round. You could select a receiver in the second round. You could select these guys in the draft. And it just doesn't have to be the trade block. You could also add players in free agency and actually spend money on free agents on the offense side of the ball instead of spending all this money on the defense side of the ball in the free agency. It just doesn't have to be trading away draft capital for other teams' washed receivers or receivers that aren't good anymore. You could actually add it based off of free agency, and you could add it based on the draft and not have to give away and trade away draft capital for these older players. So there's other ways to add playmakers than just trading for them. So hopefully the Pittsburgh Steelers, they actually do that and they don't just waste another year and waste their quarterback. Because when you're looking at their quarterback, this offense could only throw, the quarterback can only throw to who the playmakers are on the field. And when you're throwing a Van Jefferson and have to rely on him to get open every single play, that's just not going to work out well. So the Pittsburgh Steelers need to be better. Omar Khan sees that and he plans on adding playmakers. He calls out the wide receivers saying they weren't good enough and vows to add playmakers. Anyway, that's it for me. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below on this topic of Omar Khan basically saying that Steelers weren't good at wide receiver. He sees that. He sees that they need to be better. Do you believe he'll actually do something about it, or is it all talk? Let me know your thoughts. And who also would you add would you add it via the draft, free agency, or the trade? And who would you want to be added to this team? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. And also, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn notifications for everything Pittsburgh. See, there's news, updates, highlights, analysis reports, cover everything throughout free agency, draft, and just the combine. So make sure you stay tuned for everything and like, comment, and subscribe. Till next time, I'll see you guys all later. I'm out. Peace.